So we're very glad to have you. Again, I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, founder of Keeping It Sacred, and you have come to the community. We call it KITS community. Keeping It Sacred's acronym is KITS. Kit was my grandma. She made Judaism accessible, relevant, empowering, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to study some Torah, and that Torah is the Torah of our amazing speaker, esteemed speaker, Marisa Baggett. Torah means teaching, and the teachings of her life. The rabbis say that every person is like a Torah because we each have something to teach. And we're so lucky to get to study your Torah today, Marisa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Hey, and to start off all of our programming at Keeping It Sacred, we'd like to put in the chat if you'd like to dedicate our learning today in honor of, with hopes of healing for, or in loving memory of someone. Please do put that in the chat. Just put down who you are studying in honor of, with hopes of healing for, or in loving memory of. Of course, we're going to study with hopes of healing for anyone in grief. It's a grief-filled time, including those who are Catholic mourning the priest, the Pope, but also just people who are in mourning all around the world, mourning the hostages, mourning those who are in Gaza who have been killed, mourning those in the Ukraine, and personal family members as well, especially Passover, which we just had, brings up a lot of memories about who's not sitting around the table. So it's a time of grief as well. So we're going to lift up those who are in need of comfort. All right. Well, with that, we'll say the blessing for studying Torah. It's la asok b'divrei Torah. If you'd like to, please join me. And if not, just take a moment to appreciate this time, this gift that we've given to each other and to ourselves to just explore more Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitzanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu.
So b'divrei Torah.
And blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who hallows us with your mitzvot and commands us to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. The Torah, as I mentioned, Torah, the black and white pages on lettering on the text, but it's also the Torah, the teachings of our lives. So as we hear from our amazing speaker, Marisa Baggett, I'd like to encourage each of us to think about our own life stories, our own connection, relationship to food and identity, and our television as well, and the amazing impact and power that can be had through showing people the world. I'd like to introduce Marisa. She is coming to us from Tennessee. She's in Nashville now. She was in Memphis. I met her at Keeping It Sacred because she is our Union for Reform Judaism, the institution rep and lay leader, volunteer, who is an amazing person who serves on the board of the URJ, who's this great conduit between congregational life and communal life with the Union for Reform Judaism. A news reporter actually just recently asked me why should someone belong to the URJ? And so important to be able to have such a strong, to feed into the strength of the Reform movement, to progressive Judaism, to learn from and benefit from the wisdom of others, and to, again, connect Am Yisrael, connect the people of the Jewish people to each other in such an amazing way. So I know Marisa as a devoted URJ board member, but also she owned a deli, Jewish deli. I guess it could be an Italian deli, so I should say Jewish deli. She is an amazing sushi chef, and she just came off of this amazing exploration of serving on Morimoto's sushi chef show. It's on Roku if you haven't seen it. I binge watched a bunch of it this week, and it was really exciting. Season 1 was really exciting. She'll be on season 2. So if you've ever seen chef shows, it's really great. But it's a really wonderful way to see how culture and art really, and food and savory, salacious delicacies can be put forward for people in a show of love. It's cooking is such a way to show love. So with that, I want to introduce and welcome Marisa Baggett. Welcome to you.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. I love being here at Kits, and it's just such an amazing community. And I'm so honored to have been invited to, speak. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I wanted to just start with that. Like cooking is such an expression of love for so many people.
Mhm.
And I wanted to know a little bit about, your earliest thoughts and memories about food, your connections to food when you think of food in your early days and your relationship to it. What did that look like?
Yeah. So, I grew up in Mississippi and food was a really big part of everything. Everyone in my family, amazing, amazing cooks. So I was surrounded by all this really amazing food. And, it was the type of food you would think of, the typical Southern fare, the delicious fried chicken and the, meat and three and biscuits and all of that. But I just remember as a kid always wondering, like, what are other people eating? Like I somehow knew that other people didn't eat the same way, and I just was always curious about that. And you know, um I just remember as I got a little older and I was babysitting, one of my favorite things to do when the kids would finally fall asleep is I would go in the kitchen or the living room and I would flip through the mom's cookbooks or their or their Southern Living magazines because it was so fascinating and so different than what I was used to. And I just remember just like I would almost memorize everything. And I always like to say that in some ways, I think that that started me on a path of training my palate through my imagination because I didn't have access to a lot of the things. So I just kind of, imagined what that might be like.
Hmm. I
Mhm.
love that. Yeah, it's fun. My son, he always flips through all the food, the cookbooks here, and I think about, yeah, how you can eat with your eyes before you
Yeah.
even, thinking about all those different like flavor combinations. Was there any particular flavor combination that you remember thinking of as particularly interesting?
I don't know if it was a flavor combination so much as it was just like there were certain things that just felt exotic, like asparagus or Brussels sprouts. It seems pretty common, but they just weren't things that, that we were growing in the garden or picking up from neighbors. So, that was just kind of something that was fancy food. And I always wanted to try, fancy food.
And then how did your connection with food in the South connect to sushi? Where did that bridge get built?
Yeah, so if you told me at any point before I decided to become a sushi chef that that was going to happen for me, I would have said, okay, this is just so crazy. It's not something that was ever on my radar. Um, I was very fortunate in my mid 20s to have supportive parents who helped me open my own restaurant. And it was a very cute restaurant, the Chocolate Giraffe in our hometown in Mississippi. And I was just kind of loving life. I was doing all of these creative things and making, just kind of cool Southern food. And I was also decorating wedding cakes. So I just thought in my mind, oh, I'm going to be this amazing wedding cake designer. And I had a client come in one day and say, "Hey, can you cater something for me?" And I'm like, "Sure. What are we having?" And he said, "Let's do sushi." And I'm like, "Great, let's do it." So he leaves the restaurant and I start freaking out because I'm like, I don't know what sushi is. I'd never seen it. I'd never eaten it before. There was no sushi bar in town. So I didn't have a way to like go and try to, reverse engineer it. So I did like I thought back to when I was a kid and I just, I went and got a bunch of cookbooks and I did the whole, imagining things in my mind and trying to figure out what that could be. And what I ended up making turned out to be great for the party, and we kind of kept doing it. And at some point I just realized, this thing is really fascinating, and it just kept like pulling me in. And I was like, I think I'm going to become a sushi chef. And it really was just kind of like a spur of the moment decision one day.
Wow, that's so fascinating. It was kind of like a calling, maybe even in religious terms, we might say
Yeah,
you were called
yeah.
to it. Amazing. Do you remember what you made that night?
I remember some of it. One
Sure.
of the things that Japanese, cuisine, like, that I was reading about a lot in the cookbooks, there was a lot of pickled vegetables, and my little Asian market in town didn't have most of the things, so I was like, "Okay, something pickled." I was like, "We like pickled okra," so I made something with pickled okra, and that kind of became, like, one of my signature sushi rolls that I still make to this day. But then also I did a lot of cooked seafood because the one thing is like, I'm not going to kill anybody. I'm going to, because I was thinking, very erroneously, because I didn't know what sushi truly was. I thought it meant raw fish. So I was like, no raw fish. So we had like crawfish and, fried shrimp and just kind of a lot of creative little things like that that felt kind of southern, but also, enough exotic enough that I could put it inside of a sushi roll.
Amazing, amazing. And somewhere in there, you also came to own a Jewish deli. Can you tell us about that journey? Was that before or after the sushi and chocolate giraffe?
Oh, so that was way after. So when I decided to become a sushi chef, I actually took some time to live in LA and go to sushi school because I wanted to make sure that if I was going to become a sushi chef, whatever I was doing in Mississippi was fine, but I wanted to be able to stand up really anywhere in the world and say, I know what I'm doing. So I went to sushi school. And then after sushi school, I landed in Memphis at a job running a sushi bar there. And I was very, very excited about everything going on there. But that's also where another shift was happening. I also, at that point, started embracing Judaism. And so I was going through this kind of like, interesting tension between these two worlds because to me, they didn't feel like they fit together. And
Mm,
I really kept them apart for a while. And as I learned more and more and interacted more and more with people in the sushi world, I started learning more about seafood sustainability. And so I was kind of having these big moments of tension in my career. And at some point, I decided, okay, I'm only going to use seafood that's sustainable. And also, I think I'm going to go kosher.
amazing.
And
Amazing.
so that really kind of put me in a place where I didn't know where sushi was going to fit anymore or if it could. And I started doing sushi for hire for kosher events in Memphis.
Hmm.
And that was a lot of fun. And to kind of supplement that, because not everyone wanted sushi at their event, I started doing more catering and expanded just to, kosher catering in general. And that eventually led me to opening the deli.
Wow. Was sushi on the menu at the deli as well? Or was it like a traditional deli with, I don't know, I think of Katz's. It's all in
So
pastrami.
I wouldn't say it was a traditional deli, but we certainly did do things like, I was curing my own pastrami and corned beef and that sort of thing. But we had this grab and go case. And so that's where the sushi part would come in, is I would make sushi to put in the grab and go. And we couldn't keep it stocked.
Wow,
Yeah.
that must have been great.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun.
That's so amazing. And so all of that, all of your journey through food kind of led you to the Sushi Master television show. Can you tell us how that came about?
Yeah. So, you know, first of all, Morimoto is such a larger than life figure, and he's someone that I've always wanted to meet. I just remember, back in the days when, the Food Network was like still very, very, very early days where, they would show the original show from Japan and, the one where the guy bites into the bell pepper in the beginning.
Yes.
I still
Yes.
don't understand what that's about, but I just remember watching him, and when they started the show in America, I was like, "Oh my goodness, he's like my sushi idol, and one day I wanna meet him and be like him," and, fast forward through 2 decades almost of a sushi career, um, we were just past the pandemic, and I'd closed the deli. I'd gotten really sick, and I was burned out, and I was just kind of like at this point in my career where I don't even know if I wanted to be in food anymore. Maybe I felt like, okay, this has been a good run. It's been a long journey. I've done a lot of really cool stuff. Maybe this is it. And at the time, I was dabbling in Jewish art. And I actually took down my sushi website that I'd had for over a decade and put up a Jewish art website. And one day I got this random email through that email address saying Morimoto Sushi Master. And the first line in the email was, "Are you the sushi Marissa? We've been looking for you." And I'm like,
Wow.
is weird, that they contacted me through my Jewish art website because I didn't have any way to contact me through food anymore because I just wasn't
Wow.
sure that that's something that I wanted to do.
Again,
Yeah.
calling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Calling. Wow. And so then they told you about the show and invited you to apply, or how did it work?
Yeah, so a lot of these shows, what they do is they have casting scouts that kind of scour the internet or wherever, and they look for people, and you go through a round of interviews when you talk to producers and things, and they ask you your life story, and then they ask you your life story over and over again to see if they can like pull out these different threads that might make for some really good TV.
Yeah.
And, and I think that for me, I don't know how many rounds other people went through, but I didn't go through very many because they were just like, okay, you are saying a lot of things.
Amazing. Amazing. So they could just sense your passion for sushi and your expertise from going to the school in LA and for all the catering experience you've had. And it's so amazing.
Yeah, and I think also, they were looking at this, idea of, okay, this is somebody who's really different in the sushi world.
Who's got a perspective? Do you keep kosher in the sushi chefing that you do? Do you, I know that's not the right word. But as you do this, because I was just watching the finale last night of season one, right? And there was so
Mhm.
much like shrimp and crab and other items. And I feel like it's such, Japan is obviously an island country, and
Yeah.
and there's so much bounty of food in the sea, and they don't usually limit their palate to kosher, like the rules of kashrut. So I
Mhm.
wondered about, how does that intersection play out for you or for the show? How do you think about it?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about, being burned out and stepping away from food, stepping onto the show. So, um one of the things that I was also carrying with me that the cameras don't show as I'm walking onto this show is I was really questioning more than just whether or not I wanted to be in food anymore. I was questioning whether or not keeping kosher was still important to me. And the producers were, they're producers. They're going to poke and pick. And, the first things they say to me are, really, at some point you can't like go through this whole show without using something that's not kosher. And I'm like, I know, I know. So I think for me early on in the show, I decided rather than have someone else dictate to me that this is something I have to do, I'm
Mm.
gonna pick it. And I kind of felt like I made peace with it. So very early on, I during a challenge, I chose to use shrimp, and I hadn't touched shrimp in probably 15 years.
Wow.
And so I picked up this shrimp, and all of a sudden it just felt like, I know it wasn't true, but it felt like all of the cameras were on me. It was like, you know?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
and so I just became really hyper aware, like, I thought that I was okay with it, but, the body remembers, and my hands were just like, "What are you doing?" And, I'm cooking shrimp. Not only am I cooking it, but I have to taste it because I'm gonna serve it to a judge, and I need to know if it's too salty or not. And I remember thinking, on the one hand, it tasted amazing. Don't get me wrong, it was fantastic. But also, I just felt so conflicted. And I just remember I wanted to, like, I kept avoiding things that, no pork, no shellfish, things like that, until I just couldn't anymore, until it was just, kind of shoved in my face.
Right. I mean, like that's right. And that's like the respect to the, culture of the sushi culture and respect to, what
Yes.
people use. And, that's, right. So there's like, yeah, it's interesting to think about like how do we, many of us here are probably thinking about how we navigate the line of kashrut and, respect for other people and for cultures and our own personal line and, competing moral values of either kashrut versus, you know, um, sharing a meal with another person and also
Yeah.
leveling the playing field for all the other competitors, right? I mean, yourself, right? It wouldn't be fair if everyone's cooking like certain things and you were, that was like a territory you couldn't go into as well, right? So,
Yeah. And, I think that for me, this was such a great experience for me to have, um, all of that kind of thrust upon me at one time because, I really had to deal with my emotions and think about that. And I don't know that I would have come to my final decision about how I felt about kashrut had I not been kind of forced to face it and think about it.
right.
So for me, what ended up happening is once the cameras stopped rolling, I realized that keeping kosher wasn't important to me anymore. But I
Mhm.
also realized that eating meat was no longer important to me. And that was kind of a surprise.
Huh.
Hmm.
Any kind of meat, red
Right.
meat, right?
Red meat, chicken, all of that sort of thing.
Wow. So, yeah, I mean, I think that that's like in Jewish identity, right? We need to leave room for ourselves to grow and shift and change in the same way that Jewish tradition grows and shifts and changes, and our relationship to different elements of Jewish life can grow and shift and change, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think about holiday celebration, right? We're not always going to be at our grandmother's house for Passover or whatever. Like we're not always going to, be, hosting every year. Like everything grows and it shifts and changes, and it provides us with new opportunities to form new kinds of relationships with Jewish identity in doing so.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you were representing yourself on this show, and did they ask you a lot about being Jewish as well? And your life?
So the one thing about these cooking shows is they always say to the contestants, and they kept reminding us, "We want to see you on a plate." And I thought, well, that's going to be a little problematic because I mean, which me do you want to see? Like, are we talking you want to see the Southern Black woman? Do you want to see the Jewish me that used to keep kosher? Do you want to see, the me that's like that has a very specific philosophy about Japanese cuisine? And it just didn't feel like all of that could fit onto one plate. And
Mm,
I think that for most of my career, I looked at it that way and I felt like I was, segmenting myself because, all of that can be a lot. I just see sometimes when I tell people, yeah, I'm a sushi chef, and it's like eyes glaze over, or, oh, I own a kosher deli, eyes glaze over. And then you say, well, I'm a sushi chef that owns a kosher deli in the South. It's so much. And I think for me, a lot, I was trying to protect myself from having to try to justify what I was or who I was everywhere I went. And at some point, right before we started filming, I decided, you know what? I'm just gonna throw it all on this plate. I'm putting everything out there, and I'm just gonna be me, all of it. The messy, the Jewish, the Southern, everything, just all in one plate.
That's what
And
I love.
let's just see what happens.
You know, you're like, I'm not going to be reduced to one silo of a way to experience who I am. Like I'm multidimensional, and that's
Yeah.
like, I'm not this flat plate, right? It's everything. And I
Mhm.
think that you're able to just like hold that space, and you should, right? Everyone should. You should be
Yeah.
like be who you are in all that you are in each scenario. And I really appreciate that you're able to do that and share that with people in that way.
Yeah. And I think also, I didn't realize it until later, but I think that that was part of what was causing some of my burnout, because at the end of, right when I closed the deli, I was starting to feel kind of closed in and boxed in and losing just kind of like that creative fire. And it just, it got to the point to where food felt like a job rather than this thing that was joyous like it used to be. And I found that, on the show, while I was, throwing it all out there and just being me, it was so much fun. And it lit me up inside. And I walked away with just this creative fire. And, I just really got fired up about food again. And I was like, oh, I can't believe that I was actually thinking about walking away from all of this.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a unique art form, right? Culinary arts. And I think about you and your artistry, your Jewish artwork, and the culinary arts, and just being able to um like experience and appreciate various cultures and bring it out and champion it. I mean, I think about how you champion keeping it sacred, but you champion like artistry and art and culture and community, and
Mhm.
the plate is like your canvas, right? It's a way
Yeah.
you bring it all together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how is that connecting to your like sense of belonging now? Like how did all of that come together for you?
Yeah, so, like I was saying, I always felt like I kind of had to pick a lane, and just kind of like, okay, well, I can be Southern, or I can be Jewish, or I can, be a Japanese cuisine expert. And I think that, it just felt too much for certain rooms. And but what I found, that bringing them all together, it really created something that was, just kind of unprecedented. I think for me, it was more about not just like, okay, let's try to make them all fit together and be this wonderful cohesive thing. No, I think for me it was kind of like this idea of, life is not always that neat and tidy, and I think that sometimes we try so hard to take the things that we are and make them fit. But, if I'm being honest, when I look at what I'm doing now and thinking about bringing all of me to the table, it's really that, it's not going to be something traditional, but it's going to be honest.
Right.
And, when someone takes a bite, they may say something like, "Oh, I've never had anything like this," but somehow it kind of works. It kind of feels familiar. And that's the kind of belonging that I think that we're all kind of after in life, you
Mm,
know?
love it. I love it. Well, I thought that maybe we could talk with some of the people who are on here as well to see if anyone has reflected a bit about your own culinary journey, your own journey through different um, cultural spaces and what that has done for you and for your identity. How, like, maybe the best question to start with would be, when have you most felt seen on a plate? Like
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
what was that dish where you're like, yes, this is so me. And it could be, like mac and cheese out of a box because it reminds you of childhood or something, but it could be other things as well. I know my grandma Kit, who I mentioned, I'll just share mine and we can, everyone please share yours. That my dad is Unitarian, and so on the Seder plate, you have the hard boiled egg. She'd color it like an Easter egg, so it'd be very colorful. My grandma was very colorful and artsy as well, and so we'd have this like colorful egg on the Seder plate, and that was just like a way of her acknowledging like all the members in our family and giving a sense of familiarity and also just her festivity and colors. Well, actually, when my mom divorced my dad, the colored eggs remained on the plate. What's that about? Dad's not even here. And my mom said, "Oh, well, your grandma just loved the coloring of it." There was like glitter and stuff. Anyway, I just think like that was one of the ways that I think like cultures kind of melded and were brought together to enhance an experience. So for me, that's one of the things that I think about. I don't know, do others have things to share
I
as
love that. Well, I can tell you one of mine while we're waiting for someone to kind of jump in. So I I don't know if is everybody familiar with what mishmash soup is? So mishmash soup is like it's a classic deli soup and it's got a matzo ball, it's got like a kreplach, which is like a dumpling, and it's also got noodles. So I make a miso mishmash soup and I kind of put like all the things in there. So you've got like the miso and the broth is very Japanese. And then I also do a gyoza inside, which is a type of Japanese dumpling, but the Japanese dumpling also has collard greens on the inside. And so it's just like everything all in there at once. And I love that.
sounds so good. Sounds really good. I know Sarah mentioned.
Hey, I love that I'm on this with Marissa. Since we're
Hello.
talking about Passover, I am a Greek Jew with a husband that was converted from Southern Baptist.
Uh-huh.
And it is really fun when we were trying. I've never kept kosher in my life, so trying to keep kosher was anxiety ridden for me. But at the Seder, I was able to do like Beyond Meat, kind of non meat foods and
Ooh.
create moussaka, like
Oh.
spanakopita, and all these awesome foods that just had to, I had to figure out with matzah instead of phyllo dough. But it worked. And I think that was probably a really big time when I could say I showed up on a plate.
I love it. I love
That.
Yeah, like do it your way. Like that's, it's such a show of love and respect to, guests as well that you're like, you're showing them this is a place where I can be all of who I am in this moment. And I want you to also feel like you can bring all of you and all that you are in this moment as well. I love that, Sarah. Thank you.
That.
We might need to start sharing some recipes.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking, wow, that sounds really good. I'm kind of hungry right now.
Robinson is here. Cheryl's one of the co-leads of our Kids Creativity Club, and they recently made a cookbook together as well. And Cheryl, I wondered if you had anything to share about your explorations around food in the Kids Creativity Club as well. And welcome.
That session, I wasn't there
Oh, because you were driving.
because we were traveling. So Wendy was the one who led that session, and she wasn't able to be here today because she has a doctor's appointment.
Mm.
Um, but they that day they were talking about recipes for the rest of Passover. We had talked about the Seder, the previous session, And so they were talking about, what to do the rest of Passover. Um, so I don't know. They came up with various stuff from the cookbook then. Um, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wondered if you had anything else around like food that's really particularly meaningful to you or David. Um,
Well, I do have one kind of interesting story, actually, also on Passover. So with traveling, we've been on the road during Passover, and the easiest thing for us to cook in the camper is we rather than really cooking things, we just heat up these packets of ready-made rice and ready-made beans type things. So
Hmm.
even though we're both Ashkenazi, we decided that we're going to uh, adopt ourselves as Sephardic. So we decided that the that way we could eat beans and rice and corn during Passover. Um, so we decided to become uh, what do we call it? Ashkafaric during Passover. So that we could eat the rice and beans during Passover this year.
I love it. Right. And when we think about like Jewish cuisine, right, it's not just one thing, right? It isn't only matzo balls and pastrami, right? Right. A Jewish deli could also have borekas and spanakopita, right? As we talked about. It's funny. When I was in Jerusalem for my first year of rabbinical school, I made friends with some Israelis, and I asked them like, "Where's the best place to get gefilte fish?" And their reply to me was, "What's gefilte fish?" And I'm like, I know I'm Jewish. Like, what is that? And so I finally found some, and I had them try it, and they were not impressed. And they gave me my Sephardic card. They're like, "That's it. No friend of ours is eating that. You're now Sephardic," or whatever. But it just, again, when they like, and here's the kubede, right? Like they share that with me, and it's just another way of showing like food can be so much love, of just like sharing a little bit about who you are and what kinds of foods you grew up with, and a little bit more about culture, and about I'm thinking, Marissa, about how food is tied to location, right? Like we were talking about Japan
Yeah. Mhm.
having all of this amazing seafood there, right? My wife is from the Philippines, so it's all pork and shrimp, right? In the Philippines, like so much of the food there, it's really hard to kind of keep kosher there unless you have chicken and a salt every day, which I do. But like there's I just think about how, you know, location really does shape food, like culinary experiences. So
Mhm.
if there's anything about, like, since you came to LA, you had different experiences and different things you could get, right? Our produce is amazing in LA. I remember living in New York and New Jersey, right? Like avocados were suddenly like $9, and that was 20 years ago. So it's probably, now. And you just can't make guacamole in the massive amounts that you can in California. So just I wonder about how, if there's any place in the world that you would really like to try to have culinary experiences, just because of the geography and what's available there.
Yeah, it's that's a really good question because it really it brings up a lot of things. So before I tell you where I would love to go, I just want to say something about one of the things that I committed to do once I left the show was to only make plant-based sushi. And, I get a lot of questions about, like, well, why? Why just plant-based sushi? And don't you feel like that's, way out of the scope of tradition? And for me, I feel like food is always evolving. Food is based on who's making it, where it's being made, and who it's being made for. So for me, with something so the spirit of Japanese cuisine, there's so much intention behind it, and there's so much seasonality and local and regionality behind it, that to me it feels almost less traditional to ship seafood from around the world to try to make it look like what it does everywhere, than to use what you have, or to use plants and just make something that is really honoring the spirit of fresh and seasonal and local. So having said that, I will agree with you about the produce in California. Oh my goodness. I think one of the best farmers markets I've ever been to was um was a farmers market in Davis, California. And I just remember I actually got invited out there to lead a sushi class. And I went to the farmers market, and I was just overwhelmed with like all of the different things. And I had such a hard time like narrowing it down. And I think that if I could go anywhere right now, it would be somewhere in California, just so that I could get my hands on some of that amazing, amazing produce, because it was just one of the best strawberries I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can make sushi with strawberries. I do it all the time.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? What
Yes.
like what is
Yeah. So inside the sushi, so I'm thinking of like a sushi roll that has the rice on the outside and ingredients on the inside. And actually, I was doing this before I even made plant-based sushi. But you can slice the strawberries very, very thin and place them on top of the sushi roll, and it kind of looks like, tuna. It's not, but it kind of looks like it. Um, and it just has this wonderful flavor that goes very well with the rice and with soy sauce.
wow. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, strawberries and vinegar kind of. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
salty, the sweet. Nice. Love it. So tell me a little bit about in the dishes that really most connect you with your Jewish heritage and like your Jewish identity. Like I don't know, it might be a dish for a particular holiday or something that you really connect with. It's like really you feel like is honoring that holiday and honoring that
Mm.
or teach.
Yeah, so I'm always gonna go back to matzo ball soup. And it's always like it's never looked the same for me over the years. It always looks different depending on kind of like what kind of a phase that I'm going through. But, the southerner in me always decided that instead of carrots, it should have sweet potatoes.
Hmm.
So, you'll see like little sweet potatoes floating in my matzo ball soup. But then sometimes, as I went more kosher, it became okay, well, let's make it more, there was, schmaltz in the matzo ball and, that sort of thing. And I really just adapted. To me, it just feels like one of those things. It's like it's a comforting base. And
Right.
then it's like a choose as you go adventure and add or take away different things depending.
And
Yeah.
that feels like a sacred experience in that way.
It does. It does. But what's really kind of an interesting part of like if it were a ritual, like some sort of a ritual, I would say that my knives and using my knives really brings everything all together.
Mm.
Um, I don't know how much everyone knows about Japanese knives or sushi knives, but they're very high maintenance. I think you probably take for granted when you see something that's like, "Oh, it's stainless steel." Well, it means that it's not gonna rust. Sushi knives rust. It's a long process of, like, having to clean and polish and use them every single time, and sharpen them every time, and, um, during the time when I went kosher, I actually put my knives in a shadow box because they weren't appropriate for use or to take with me whenever I go into a kosher kitchen. And so for a while, they kind of watched me on the wall. And I actually had to take them off the wall to go onto the show. And I just remember just the ritual of doing all of that while it was very Japanese. It also because I do a lot of Jewish food in my home, it just felt like a Jewish ritual to me because there was like, you have all of the care and the intention that you have to put into it. And so I think about that every time I get ready to chop or do something.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like, the activity in the temple and the temple times when
Yeah.
we did sacrifice animals, and how we had to make sure the high priest would have to make sure that the knife was impeccably sharp, to prevent the most amount of suffering, right? So to prevent suffering
Hmm. Hmm.
of the animal, and just like that ritual of knowing that there's a sacred act involved in sharpening the knife to perform this sacred ritual of
Yes. Yes.
cooking up food to God, right? Like creating food for God. I always think of it as barbecue, but and God loves the smell of barbecue, right? The Torah says, like the Torah says, like God loves the smell of barbecue, and just that idea that like sacred ritual of food and sustenance and life force and energy, even if it's out of a beet, like a root vegetable, right? Like there's energy in that, and there's a sacredness of like participating in creation with God, of feeding ourselves and sustaining ourselves and feeding others and
Yes.
giving that kind of energy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
We have a question in the chat, and everyone feel welcome to private message me if you are more comfortable, or just or you could also raise your hand in the chat or come off of mute. But we'll go to a question I have. We were talking about kosher, and there was just an interest in specifying when we've been talking about kosher. Is it kosher certified, kosher style? Was
Mm.
chef certified in the restaurant? And how are the foods textured? Do you have anything to add around your relationship to the kosher certification process?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I actually it was under observation. Um, we were under we were under the VOD, and so there was a lot of vigorous things that had to go into it. I actually started off working out of an Orthodox synagogue kitchen. And so the kitchen that I started off in, the rabbi was on the council of the VOD. So the process there was a little bit less rigorous as far as what I had to do, because I would just walk into the kitchen and, the supervising mashgiach, the person who watches over everything, they basically told me, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. It became a little bit more involved when I went to open the restaurant, because we did continue under the VOD and certification. The head of the VOD at the time really felt like he wanted, even though I had been doing this for a lot of years under a very trusted rabbi, he wanted me to take an online course. Even though I personally could not have been certified as a mishkiach, he still wanted me to have the knowledge. And so I took this very intensive online course. We focused a lot on washing produce. So the thing about keeping kosher when you're under supervision is to make sure that there's absolutely no chance for bugs or insects to be in any of the produce. And so there's a lot of different protocols that have to happen with washing produce. And then, of course, just a lot of inspections, a lot of random inspections that, they would just pop by to make sure, and of course having a full-time mashgiach. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank you for the question to our participant, and thank you for that amazing answer. Yeah, it's so interesting because I actually went to this vegan Thai restaurant recently, and I have known the owner, and she started asking me if she thinks I should, if she thought I thought she wanted to know if I thought she should get kosher certification.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, it's interesting that you're asking me, right? Like, and I started trying to think about it from like a business proposition side of like, well, there's a lot of like kosher shuls around, and I'm sure a lot of people would really appreciate kosher catering, and you could probably market it that way. But I don't know about how much it kind of costs to go into like getting that certification, and like and what the rigor is around trying to do that. So yeah, so for a vegan restaurant, I guess, yeah, really washing all of the produce really well. But what does it look like? What is, if someone wanted to become kosher certified as a restaurant, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so I think the first thing you would have to do is decide which certifying body you want to use, because there's, several. And usually, if you're in a place where there's a Chabad, they don't always necessarily join the VOD. VOD is a really large kind of certifying organization across the country. So you have to decide that, and there's sometimes there's a little bit of politics involved there. So you have to decide, if you're doing this to reach the most people, you have to decide which organization the people trust the most.
Mm.
Then it's just, yeah. And then it's just having a conversation with them to see what the steps are, and and what's required, because some organizations are more rigorous than others and require different things.
And is it just like a payment every year, like in like a four-digit payment every year, or a four-figure payment, or?
I think it depends on the community. Sometimes I've heard of people having to like pay a lot up front, and then there's like a yearly maintenance. I've heard of, like monthly. It really just depends
And
on the organization.
then the Passover season comes, and it's like a whole.
Oh my goodness. And then the Passover season comes, and then, I have to tell you that it's while I loved doing Passover,
Yeah.
having the deli and everything, I don't think people realize what goes into it to do Passover under supervision kosher. I mean, we're talking about taking everything out of the kitchen, power
Right.
washing every surface, including the ceilings.
Wow.
And taking apart ovens to brush out crumbs in little crevices where they might potentially be. And the amount of aluminum foil that you use is ridiculous, because you have to, even though all the surfaces have been blowtorched and power washed, you still cover everything with aluminum foil just in case. And that's before you even get started cooking.
Oh, wow, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can, I guess, in some ways, that ritual can elevate a person's spiritual connection to the season, and in some ways
Yes.
it could separate them from a spiritual connection to the season, right? It depends on what kind of person you are, and how you connect with the season.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because for me, for the first couple of years that I did it, I really did feel like it was connecting me. And then at some point it shifted, because there was so much to do, and it just became, okay, this is the job, and I just didn't have time anymore to really think about, what did Passover mean for me? And it was more about, okay, we got to get this done just so that I can, get home and be done with it.
Right.
And now I'm so fortunate that I have the opportunity to just sit around and think, and do more of an internal kind of cleansing and clearing, and thinking about, what does freedom taste like this year, and seeing
Mm,
what that shift looks like on the table. It's been really nice that way.
the meta questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I wanted to make sure that if anyone else had any other questions, you could ask them. Anyone else have any questions or comments, ways that this connected to you today? Things that you're going to be taking away from this conversation? You can just unmute if you'd like to share. Well, I really appreciate what you're sharing, Marisa, and just this idea of around food and identity and representation, and then going on this TV show to represent that, like, a person is a human being is so much more than a flat understanding of who they are. Even, Chef Morimoto, he's a sushi chef, but he's also so much more than that as well.
Yes.
And like, yeah, seeing him in the season finale of season 1, just some of his personality coming out a little bit. And, you can take your work seriously and still
Mm-hmm.
find the love for it and play around with it, right? Food is such an art form, and you can kind of
Yes.
stick with that art. And like you said, I love that you said, like, what does freedom taste like this year? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine for other holidays as well, just thinking about what does a miracle taste like for Halloween. It tastes like oil, but like what kind?
Or what is joy, or what does it joy look like on a plate, when you're coming to Purim?
Right. Or like the fresh start of the new year. It tastes like biting into a raw apple. Like, great. I love it. Except for my wife who's allergic to raw apples. But like it just right. It's another way to invite more of the senses to experience that's
Mhm.
right. God loves the smell of food, right? We can taste food, feel, touch, see, and hear, all of the different sounds, and all of the different experiences of holidays. And I really appreciate you sharing with us how you can, make it look like something on a plate, make it taste like something, and the aromas as well. Just really, really appreciate your way of engaging with Jewish tradition, to elevate experiences in such a way that has been called. You've been called to this. To
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone for tuning
Can
in.
I actually give a little blessing?
Oh, please. Would love.
Yeah, so, I just wanted to, a blessing, a permission, I just wanted to leave everyone with this thought, we inherit food, but we also get to reshape it.
Mm.
So, may your table reflect not just where you've been, but where you're headed. And may the way you cook, whether it's just for yourself or for others, remind you that there's always room on the plate for everything you wish to serve.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. I love that.